teachers. The teachers. My brothers and sisters of color, we gotta do better. No survival in this era if we turning on each other. Like a family reunited, they hate it when we together. Now let's talk about it. Listen to the teachers, let them tell you. You want facts behind your questions, Dr. Rick, give them the answer. Followed by wise words, introducing Dr. Michael Blanchard. Many guests and activists every week leading by example. When there's problems, there's solutions. Together we are the answer. The teachers.
Hey, teacher.
There you go.
Hey, brothers, I absolutely love that intro. I love the intro.
Oh, it's the single coming out, my brother. My cousin, Sane Brown, did the intro, and it was so good. I said, man, we got to turn this into a Black Power anthem and a single. So it's coming out. It releases the 31st, right ahead of Black History Month. So, you know.
Yeah. So everybody, welcome to another episode of the Teachas. You have me, Dr. Rick, Dr. Michael Clay Blanchard, and we have special guests. This is going to be a very interesting conversation for those of you who are historians and know a little bit about the history of our country and politics. We're going to talk politics. We're going to talk community responsibility. But we have with us Dr. Kwame Innis. And you may recognize that last name. If you don't, you will. And before we get started, I want to remind you that this particular episode of The Teachers is brought to you by Black Men Lead, Rite of Passage. This is a week we're following through on our fundraiser, so support the work we do. I'm not going to stay on that. I want to get into this thing. I'm going to turn it over. Now, y'all know how this goes, right? I tell Dr. Michael Blanchard that I'm turning it over to him, right? I give it to him, and then some kind of way I end up back with it. He's sitting back there doing this, like, yeah. But Dr. Blanchard, let's be clear, he's instrumental in bringing the vast majority of the guests that we have seen. He's been very instrumental. There are a couple that I brought up. Somebody else I'll be bringing, filmmaker Tony Lindsay is coming up. It's going to be exciting because he is very vocal on some very polarizing issues, but he's also a powerful tool and instrument that I think we're going to benefit from in the future. And I want you guys to meet him. But right now we have a dynamic person that I am excited to hear from. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Blanchard so he can introduce his frat brother. And I want y'all to behave.
To be your frat brother.
I want y'all to behave yourself while y'all on here.
Doc, soon to be your frat brother.
Absolutely.
All right.
So, yeah, let me just start off by saying Brother Kwame and I had a whole lot of discussions last year in 2021, and I was just amazed at his background. And I had grown up watching Roy Innis and other civil rights icons on various shows in the 70s and 80s growing up. And I came from a family where mom was a Republican and dad was a Democrat. So they used to like go at it. And I would sit there at 7 years old taking all that in. And so, you know, with this being Dr. King's weekend that we celebrate, I thought it only appropriate to bring someone on that comes from a political background, a family of politics, similar to Dr. King, to talk about, you know, where we are in this movement, what it was like growing up in a politically dynamic family, as Kwame Innis has grown up in. He has a brother named Niger, what we'll get into, that's still over core. If for those of you that remember, I'm going to read his bio. I mean, once I read his bio, you'll see why I wanted to have him on. So Kwame is a native New Yorker. and the seventh child of famed civil rights icon, the late Roy Innis. As a standout scholastic wrestler, Kwame earned a scholarship to represent the fifth-ranked Flying Dutchman of Long Island Hofstra University Division I men's wrestling team. After graduating in 1989, Kwame worked in the computer industry for some tech giants, to name a few: Canon, IBM, and AT&T. In 1998, he joined the Nassau County Police Department, where he excelled as a community liaison and a school resource officer. Eyeing retirement in 2015, Kwame came back to school to become a recovery coach and certified substance abuse counselor. Born into the justice movement, Kwame is a public speaker and human rights advocate. And in 2017, as part of family documentary, Kwame became the host of the People's Forum, a public access talk show in New York City. And lastly, he is a serial entrepreneur. Kwame built custom barber chair restoration and built it into the #1 antique barber chair emporium in the country. And in 2018, Kwame was part of a group that launched the nation's first Black-owned cognac. Kwame was also a 1986 initiate of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and he is a life member. Welcome, Kwame.
Life member on all 3 levels.
Welcome, my brother. Welcome.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. I'm humble and gracious, and I appreciate you having me on.
I could just end the show after that bio, but anyway, hey man, how was?
No, man, I'm in the presence of greatness.
No, man, that's you, brother. But anyway, how was it, man? You know, this weekend of Dr. King's holiday and everything, as we reflect on where we are as a collective. We had Dr. King, we have Julian Bond. They all have political legacies, and a host of others. But man, how was it? How was your upbringing in such a politically active family, man? Just tell us how it was growing up.
It was amazing, and it was a journey. It's 55 years of. I was born in 1966, right in the middle of the civil rights struggle. My mother was a member of Harlem Corps. My father, a member of National Corps. Wow. And I just grew up on picket lines. Grew up going to rallies and going to interviews and just traveling with my father and my brothers and sisters many times around the country and around the world. Going to all these different events, fighting, for our people.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about the political dynamic of the family itself, because
it's pretty amazing. So my dad, Black nationalist, grew up a Garveyite, a starch Garveyite, West Indian kid who came from St. Croix at the age of 14 here to New York City, excelled, ended up going to Korea, ended up going to City College. Finds his way to Corps almost by accident, and in a few short years ascends to the chairmanship of National Corps. That's when I come along. I'm born then as the 7th child. I have 3 brothers who were also born within that movement, and we were the triplets, as they used to call us, pretty much right behind one another. And we were the children of that movement, always involved in cutting edge civil rights legislation and civil rights activity.
So politically, are all of the siblings as well as Roy the same? Talk about that.
Politically, politically, we are as diametrically opposed as any people could possibly be. Sometime in the mid 80s, my dad decided, based on a lot of reading and a lot of thought and a lot of, I think, personal struggle, that we needed to integrate the Republican Party. That there had come a time in the 50s when at party of Lincoln, Black folks had been Republicans after Lincoln straight through until the 1950s. And then civil rights legislation comes in and we switch over, and now we're, part and parcel, all locked into the Democrats. And he felt that that had betrayed us at a certain point and didn't allow us to come to the table with honest brokers who could talk to us, both of us woo us, and both of us let us know what's for our benefit. What do we have? Quid pro quo. Instead of the Democrats just saying, okay, we got them locked up, and the Republicans saying, well, they're not going to come with us. They don't like us, and we'll just ignore them, and we don't have to come to the table with any Black agenda or anything for this community. We can just ignore them. There's 40 million plus of us, and we have to be recognized. And he felt that if he stepped forward as a leader to say, hey, you know what, we need to integrate this Republican Party. Why are we allowing one half, you know, of this electorate to ignore us? And he stepped out and he did it early. He was, you know, he caught a lot of flack for it. He caught a lot of flack for it. But I think after this year's series of elections and the fact that Black folks really didn't get much in terms of tangibles, and now we're actually fighting and trying to get the filibuster moved so that we can get voting rights in. And the Democrats, the two Democrats, have held out. Sinema and Manchin have held out and almost thrown us, you know, into the water. And now we're saying, wow, we saved the Democratic Party. We came out in South Carolina, we saved Joe's campaign, and we brought him to the presidency. And there's been no tangibles for our community whatsoever. And that was one of the big things my father was about, integrating both parties. So both had to come to us and deal honestly.
So Dr. Wallace and I were having a conversation earlier about how, you know, growing up, even in the 70s, man, when I grew up watching your dad debate Democrats and independents, I never saw him as that C word. Out of respect for your dad, I'm not going to say that C word. You know what I'm talking about? C-O.
Not at all.
I never saw him.
He couldn't have been
that way, though. I saw
more of a Black nationalist.
Yeah. So why? I mean, we have to grow up politically, don't we? I mean, because we automatically assume
yes,
not or if you ask for accountability, or if you ask for tangibles from the Democrats, if you critique the Democrats in any way, shape, or form, oh, you must be Trump. You must be a Trump supporter. You must be a Republican.
Exactly. You know, I mean, exactly. And as American citizens, under this Constitution, we have the protections and the benefits of all of the sections of government, not just half, not just a piece, all. And we should embrace it all as citizens and as Americans, and we should receive all those benefits. And just because the Republicans take control of the White House or the Senate or the Congress for a 4-year period doesn't mean that we have to go to sleep. You know, we have to play that game of politics, and it's quid pro quo. You have to get something in return.
Absolutely.
I think that is a big part of the problem. I think that, as you said, most people, if you ask them to explain how Blacks who were historically Republican up until the 1950s, when the civil rights movement kicked into full gear, how do we go to being predominantly, and I mean super predominantly, Democrat? The vast majority couldn't explain it, but they're willing to defend it with their lives. And so then you have to look at, okay, since the civil rights legislation was passed in the early 1960s, progressively, every presidential cycle, we have increased in turnout, and we have historically given about 90% of our vote to Democrats without question.
Exactly.
And we have not.
Exactly. The Black family has come in at 90% and received 0. Right. And there are other groups who come in at barely 50% or 60%, and both parties run to the floor and they bow down and they say, what can we do to make your community whole? What can we do to let your community know that we're here for you? Is there any legislation that you need? Are there protections, as in the Asian hate crime bill that showed up, you know, with almost no effort? It was voted in unanimously. Right. And then the idea that, you know, that African Americans, you know, the descendants of American slavery and those new immigrants would have the protections of the federal government in that 14th Amendment and in all of its levels. You know, somehow if people can sit with it with a clear conscience, and mind you, a lot of those same people who didn't want to vote it in this time, they voted for it in previous times, and they were on record of having voted for it in previous times. And then all of a sudden now, I mean, Mitch McConnell is one. He's on record of having voted for Voting Rights Act in previous times, and now this time, you know, he can't be seen.
Right, and that's the game of politics, and I don't think most people understand. You've talked about it before. If you don't understand that it's about fair exchange, and you operate on emotion, exactly, or you operate on some false identity of loyalty, what happens is there's only so much energy. There's only so much that can be done within a particular cycle in which the legislature and the Senate is in play that can be done. Okay, so if I've got you locked up, I can't give attention to someone that I already have locked up when I'm trying to secure the vote of other people. So if you're locked up, if I know I got you in my pocket, you get nothing. Mama used to say the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Well, if you're giving me 90% of your vote, you're not squeaking at all. You're saying, hey, we believe in you, we got you, we rolling with you, no matter what. Okay, I'm gonna put you over here. Unfortunately, there's no benefit to loyalty in this game. This game is about what have you done for me lately? And we never ask that question. We just show up and we vote. And like Dr. Blanchard said, this is a time to educate ourselves. This is a time to literally mature in the area of politics, to understand it, that we can have friends that are Democrats. We can have friends that are independent. So we can have friends that are Republicans. We can also have people we're not friends with that serve a purpose for us now. And we've got to learn how to work and create deals. Exactly. And we see this not only in politics, we see this in our natural cultural behavior. If we don't like you, we ain't doing anything with you, no matter how much it'll be. We will cut our throat not to deal with someone who could benefit us solely because we don't like them.
Dr. Rick, the great playwright August Wilson has a line in Fences, and Denzel Washington, master actor, I mean, he delivers it beautifully. He says, they don't pay me because they like me. They pay me because they owe me. And we are owed a debt. We're owed the respect and the humanity that every citizen of this country deserves. And now there's a humanity that seems to be lacking when somebody has to ratify a group's voting rights. What they're saying, in my estimation, is that we lack humanity. They don't see the humanity in us.
Exactly.
And to have to walk in. If I'm Jim Clyburn, if I'm our frat brother, Congressman Jeffries, if I am anybody in that Black Congressional Caucus, and I'm an elected official, and many of them are doctors and members of the Bar Association and teachers, and every 10 years, somebody has to say that I'm a human being. At a certain point, somebody needs to say, this needs to stop. This needs to stop. We're not going to keep saying every 10 years that African Americans are human beings and that they deserve protections, and voting rights. We're not going to do this. Why are we doing this every 10 years? It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
Hey, Kwame, sounds like your dad, man, was before his time, obviously. I'm just intrigued.
Yeah, he absolutely was. In the 80s, he ran for Congress.
Yeah.
At the Republican convention in New Orleans, he actually took my brother Niger and I with him, as an education, to see what the process was, to be on the floor and to watch the delegates and to hear the language and to see the culture and to see all of these citizens, all these Americans from all over the country at the Republican convention. And let me say, there were thousands of Black Republicans from each state representing, at that convention. So he wasn't alone. He was early to go out front as a political civil rights leader, but he was definitely not alone.
But talk a little bit about his ideology, man, because it seems much more complex than
the ideology. The ideology was first and foremost Black nationalism. Black nationalism. In the 60s and 70s, he spent many years on the road
as a Republican.
No. He didn't become a Republican. He didn't become a Republican until the late 80s.
Okay.
But in the 60s and 70s, he actually was a Democrat. Wow. He had done voter registration with CORE. They had supported many New York California, Baltimore, different candidates around the country. They were very, very active in a lot of voter registration drives and a lot of fundraisers and a lot of support. But in the 90s, he just saw that somebody had to step forward. First and foremost, he was about Black nationalism, us as a people, being able to excel and exceed in all fields of human endeavor in this country and abroad. He understood that there was a connection to the diaspora in the islands. He understood there was a connection to the continent. He understood that, you know, we needed to work together. That's how I got my name. I'm actually named because he and Nkrumah were friends. I was in my mother's, you know, womb, and he and Nkrumah were friends. And he says, hey, if I have a son, I'm going to name him after you, you know. And it just so happens that I was born on a Saturday, and I received, you know, Dr. Nkrumah's name.
Wow. So what kind of other people came to your home? I mean, you know, I'm sure that you've probably seen, like everyone, like in the 70s and 80s when your dad was a Black nationalist. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the people you've met and talked to, and how they may have shaped your political ideology now?
One of the people that I met that I would say had the most impact on me, in terms of the world, had to be the Emir of Zaria, and in fact the president at that time, Sani Abacha, of Nigeria. I was part of a delegation that went to Nigeria for one of their first elections as observers. And we got to sit down with members of the government, got to sit down with the president. We also got to sit down with the Emir of Zaria, and it was like going back in time. It was like being in the 14 to 1500s, in sitting in this man's court, watching all the pageantry and him telling the history of his family, and where he was in that dynasty and what his role was, however much symbolic it may be in terms of his actual global power, but how his people saw him, and what he represented, you know, going back thousands of years. So I would say the Emir of Zaria, something that sticks in my mind.
Wow. Okay. So,
you know, a lot of times you hear people say we're descendants of kings and queens, but I've actually been able to sit down and talk with them and feel that feeling.
Right. So I'm interested to hear your opinion of where we are today in 2022. Where are we at today politically?
In 2022, I'm afraid, like you said, we're politically naive. In this last series of elections, I think we were, as Malcolm would say, we were hoodwinked, we were duped. And now in 2022, when these midterms come up, and the team that we went with gets soundly beaten, and you know, I shudder to say that already being basically fourth-class citizens in this country with nothing to look forward to, and having not cornered the Republicans to make them see us as viable supporters, that they're going to turn their back on us when they get in 2022, and when they control the Senate and the Congress, and we'll be going on almost 16 years of nothing.
Right. And so here's the problem. Here's the problem. He is absolutely right. What's going to happen, and we don't realize the trench that we dug for ourselves. Say what you want to say about Trump, but the one of many things that Trump did was prove that you don't even have to solicit the Black vote to get into office.
Exactly.
He didn't pander at all.
Exactly.
Black voters.
Exactly. In fact, what he did is he dog whistled and he did I think it was George Wallace, you know, who, when he ran, you know, he said that, you know, he would, you know, when he lost his first election, he said that he would never allow someone to denigrate and in him. I don't want to say the word on the podcast, but you know what I mean. And the fact that when he came back, all he did is wave that flag and yell and throw incendiary bombs and let that horrible element know that he was going to do whatever he could to keep things the same and to hold black people back. And Trump saw that, and guess what? That works in America. America can lie all it wants to, you know, but there's 70 million people who say that thing works.
Right.
70 million people is a lot of people.
Right. And simple mathematics has to come into play because we were told and gassed up to believe we put Barack Obama in office. We're 45 million people strong.
And then when you look at the data, when you look at the data, you realize that it was white females,
right,
that put Barack Obama in power.
And who was it? And who was it that put Trump in office? White females.
White females.
Yeah. So the thing is, there's a game to be played, but don't ever get caught up in the fact that you make up 13% of the population and you can control elections. Right. That's not where the game is played on a national level. First of all, you have to be anchored on local levels and state levels where you do have a greater pull with your collective.
Exactly. In the cities where we have a numerical advantage, in the cities where we have the numbers, there is no way that we, like you said, you just used the word, the block vote. In cities like Syracuse and Rochester and different cities, they have come together and used that block vote to get people elected. You know, in New York City, you know, when David Dinkins got elected, when Mayor Adams just got elected in Detroit, when Kwame Kilpatrick in DC, when Marion Barry got elected in Chicago, in LA. I mean, there are places where when we get together and we identify with a candidate, you know, from any culture, we identify, we put our vote behind that candidate gets elected, you know, but we don't get anything in exchange for that.
Right.
When once people get in, they can generally tell us that, oh, well, I have to do it this way so that everybody else doesn't get angry. But if you just be patient, we'll take care of you on the back end.
And that's the fallacy of identity politics, isn't it? I mean, you vote for someone simply because they share your identity and culture and you know, your ethnicity. But we, like we've said throughout this show, we don't necessarily get anything returned, even from our black politicians. And talk a little bit about we talk a lot about black gatekeeper politics, where, you know, yeah, boss, I'm gonna
Jim Clyburn. I'm
gonna bring the vote, boss. But
Jim Clyburn,
but the plan
from the state of South Carolina,
we get nothing in return from it.
Nothing at all.
Yeah,
nothing at all.
What they call black gatekeeper politics. We have to get away from that.
Yeah. Well, if we look at the numbers in South Carolina, if we look at the wealth data in South Carolina, and we look at the fact that they have the third ranking member in the House, you know, and then whenever issues come up that impact black folks in particular in South Carolina, if I'm mistaken, please correct me, at least the 1, 2, or 3 largest black population in this country, you know, they don't receive the funding in exchange. They don't receive the programs in exchange, you know, based on the numbers of people that are there. You know, when issues come up, Jim Clyburn was cornered by a group called ADOS, the American Descendants of Slavery. And he was asked what he felt about reparations. Now, you're in South Carolina. My great-great-grandfather, on my mother's side, was enslaved in South Carolina on Edisto Island. And when somebody comes to you as a representative of those coastal islands, of Charleston, of Georgetown, of Orangeburg, and they ask you, with that population, what do you feel about reparations? And you laugh about it and say that it's not going to happen. And what do you think, Nancy Pelosi's going to write a check? Well, guess what? There's some very, very, very smart people that have been writing books, that have been doing studies on reparations, both black and white. The government commissioned economists to do studies on reparations as far back as the 1930s. You know, there's a great scholar, William Doherty, who has a book, From Here to America.
Yeah, Dr.
And Dr. Doherty has stated 1,000 different ways, you know, what reparation means to Black America. Raj Chetty an economist from Harvard and Stanford, has done studies. He doesn't have a dog in that fight. He's an Indian American, but he has done studies, and it shows the disparity and the trajectory for Black men and Black women when they don't receive support at home or from the government.
Exactly.
Yeah, we see it in all the leading economic indicators, you know, whether it's employment, housing, education, and our numbers keep getting worse.
We're at the bottom of all those, except murder, incarceration, you know,
yeah.
and Dr. Clark, please help me, and mental illness.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we these are things that I feel that we have a responsibility to educate, and that's been one of the thrusts of my passion for the last 30 years, is not only to learn, but then to disseminate what I've learned to the masses in a manner in which it can be digested and then actualized into a behavior. Because what we have is a behavior that is literally so conditioned into our psyche that we have been conditioned to act against our best interests.
Absolutely.
And then defend that action with passion.
Yeah.
And it has no logic to it. It has no reason to it. It is simply how we feel.
Yeah.
And we act on our feelings far too often. We seek everything, and now we're in a place of escapism.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we identify so heavily and live so vicariously through celebrities. That's why we get so caught up. And I tell you this all the time, Doc, then I'll pass it back. That's why a channel like this one doesn't have 100,000 subscribers, because I don't pander to sensationalism. This is a place where you come and we'll talk about almost anything, but it's got to be something that you can learn and gain from it. I'm not here to just gossip. I'm not just here to give you your fix for the day. I want you to take something away that you can fight with, because there are people out there that are literally trained from early childhood how to win off of your ignorance. And so what happens is we consistently move, and I can tell, let me post something about something that happened with a star. It'll be something that has a teachable moment in it, but just the idea that those stars' names are mixed, my numbers go way up. I could come with something literally that could change your life, change your family's life, and it's barely anything, doesn't get shares, doesn't get a lot of attention. Now, I'm not here for likes. I'm not here for shares. I'm not here for the approbation or approval of anyone. I know who I am, but it doesn't serve you well when your mindset literally pushes you towards emptiness. And then that's how the media has taken us for a whirlwind ride in the last 4 years.
That's true. To even suggest, Kwame, that we do something different or other than what we've been doing the last 50 years, our people fight that. I mean, you say, let's do something different than just blindly continuing to vote for Democrats. They automatically assume you're Republican. They automatically assume that you're conservative or what have you. And that what Doc just described is that situation that we find ourselves in, where, like he said, if you're talking about the type of topics in the way that we're talking on this show, it's not very popular.
Yeah, you don't get traction, and you don't tend to trend, all over the web, because you said something that may be beneficial to Black people, and maybe somehow, and maybe against white supremacy and its insidious nature of how it moves around unseen. I have a friend who was a superintendent in Houston, and he came to Long Island to Roosevelt High School, and he was a superintendent there. And he taught me something Doc, reminded me when you said that we have to educate ourselves. As superintendent, he said that he had a group of Asian businessmen come to him and say that they wanted to rent the high school building from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock for evening school. They were going to teach math and science to members of their community and anyone else who wanted to come. And they would actually fill that building up in the evening from 4 to 8 and educate, not wait to be educated, but educate their own people, math, science, business. And he said that that's something that he would love to do in our communities, where we had like the Black Panther School, we had Saturday School, we had things that allowed us to take small children, adolescents, teenagers, and even adults who may have missed it, and give them their own history, their own knowledge of themselves, so that now they're armed to go out in this world and compete. They're armed to say, you know what, I don't have to go work for anybody. You know what, my brothers and I each have a little money. We're going to buy some trucks and start a trucking business. We're going to we have a building. We're going to open a mortuary. We have some land. We're going to expand our family farm, and we're going to hook up with some truckers that we know, and we're going to create a network, and we're going to move this produce, around the country to markets where we can get the best price. Things like that are things that we have to do. They go back to the 60s. We were doing it then. They worked. There's no reason to go away from it, and we just need to go back to those things, because unless you build your own communities and you support your own businesses and you control that the community control, no one's gonna show up and just say, okay, let me help you out.
But Doc and I've been talking about the socialization of young people, but we have to socialize the adults too. Look at our Black institutions. Doc knows I've talked and written about this. How our Black institutions like the fraternities, NAACP, Urban League, Congressional Black Caucus, they've become more social than anything. They're missing in action in this whole political dynamics. Where's their fight? We're not building, institutions. We're not building business.
Unfortunately, like other groups, the fraternities, the sororities, the different organizations, 100% of people may join, but only 5% of people are going to be active and be your workers. That other 95%, some of them are going to, trickle in and out. Many of them are going to go by the wayside, but you're going to have a core group that's going to be doing all that work, unfortunately.
But even the work that they're supposed to be doing is questionable. I mean, they're not socializing young Black men to be what they should be, and they're not in the process of building other institutions that protect our interests and economically and politically.
People don't want to be honest in this country about what's going on with Black men. They want to gloss over what's going on with Black men, the murder, the incarceration, the hopelessness of many of these young people that are in our schools. That 12 to 17-year-old age range, maybe even a little earlier. There's hopelessness in those kids. There's a lack of I don't think they have a lack of fire. I think they're taught to be afraid, and they don't see where they're going to end up. And that needs to stop. There's a book I was reading recently called The Man Not by Dr. Tommy Curry, where he goes into so much detail and data about the trauma and the abuse on every level that happens to Black men and boys that everybody just ignores. They experience post-traumatic stress. Exactly. And they're supposed to go to school. If I go to ward, I come home with post-traumatic stress, everybody recognizes it and they give me a check. But these young men and boys can grow up in homes with all kinds of stress and trauma and just be pushed out and say, okay, well, get it done.
Yeah, Kwame, you and I are former police officers, and I told Doc this before. Now they're saying that police officers, just for an 8-hour-a-day shift, 5 days a week, suffer trauma. But like you said, what about the young people?
Exactly.
We're expecting them to be able to compete.
Exactly.
After dealing with what they're dealing with at home, and then on the way to school, and then they have to deal with a 70 percentile. 70% of the teachers are white females. They have to deal with that dynamic, and the fact that they're not socialized properly and educated properly. Now what, you know?
Right. Now, you know, this is where I hang my hat. You know, when we start talking about black males, I've been doing this for 30 years now. Literally started with Dr. Frances Cress Welsing in her Cress theory of color confrontation.
ISIS papers.
Then the ISIS papers after that. Then Dr. Naeem Akbar in Breaking the Psychological Chains of Slavery. Dr. Amos Wilson, Too Many to Even Count. But there's a guy by the name of Dr. Howard Stevenson at the University of Pennsylvania. At least he had tenure there the last time I checked. He started looking at the behavior of young black men. At the same time, he connected with Dr. Joy DeGruy, who's known for post-traumatic slave syndrome. Her book,
Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Working together. I followed in behind that and started to try to gain an understanding of the causality of, first and foremost, just the proclivity for African-American adolescent and young adult male violence. Well, in doing so, I came under the understanding by work they had already did, and there was more work to be done. And so I did my own work. But what I found is they're literally in an environment. Our young boys are in an environment that literally is conducive for the behavior we see. And then they're punished for behaving and becoming a product of their environment and not understanding. This is not about an excuse. This is about prevention. And so instead of saying, okay, you're just making an excuse, no, what I'm trying to say is let's stop it. Okay, so we understand that the risk of violence comes from 5 primary factors. And so when you talk about violence, you're not just talking about violence. You're talking about with that is how quickly they are categorized in school as early as at the age of 5, of being a special education designation, meaning learning disabled, ADHD, oppositionally defiant, and all of these other situations. And so what happens is that, which leads to an alienation to the academic process, which leads to a high dropout rate, which leads to a high incarceration rate. We understand there's too much empirical data out there not to understand that that's what's happening, but we don't want to look at it. But here's the causality. You got 5 causes. The first and foremost, starting at 5, let's not go first and foremost, starting at 5, witnessing violence. Witnessing violence is a desensitization factor. It's also a traumatic experience, which also creates a new normality. You see it enough, it becomes normalized. It becomes, this is how you cope with this particular behavior. Somebody doesn't do something you like, somebody disrespects you, somebody upsets you, whatever, you respond with violence. The next one is being a victim of violence. Again, increases the risk and proclivity for violence. Now, the third is urban hassle. The urban hassle is what most of these kids are going to experience, whether they ever, if they're in the inner city, if you're on the east and northeast coast or Midwest, L trains running by your building at night or early in the morning, rattling the walls, gunshots, sirens all times of the day, navigating gang violence and drug use just to get to school and get home. You can't jump on a train. You can't jump on a train without seeing it. Okay, that's urban hassle. All the stuff you got to just deal with being a kid in the inner city in poverty. That puts you on edge. That increases your proclivity. The next 2 are huge. Number 2, the lack of proper socialization. We know now that when you properly socialize a black male into black manhood, in other words, introducing him to his purpose, showing him how he's supposed to behave, showing him what's expected of him, just as they do in the Jewish community with the rite of passage and the celebration of the bar mitzvah, just as they do in the Spanish community, just as they do in the Arab community. There are these rite of passages. We have no universal rite of passage that we put our boys into that show them and give them something to aspire to. Those boys, those Jews want to be Jewish men. They want to be Jewish men because at the very early age, there's a reward and an identity that goes with it that gives them something to aspire to. We got our kids out here just trying to figure it out. You're out here, figure your identity out. So if we could just socialize them, the number 2 influence out of all of it, we reduce their chance of violence, we reduce their their risk of criminality. We reduce their chance of going to prison and becoming institutionalized in their thinking based off of what they experience in prison. The number one cause, the number one cause is the feeling of being disrespected. The feeling of being disrespected is the number one cause of violence. Matter of fact, if you go into prison and you interview 90% of the people, you interview 100% of the people in there for violent acts, I guarantee you, in a male prison, 90% of that is going to be because in some way they felt disrespected. Now, it doesn't mean that they were actually disrespected. It meant they interpreted what happened to them as disrespect. From something as simple as stepping on my shoes, talking to my girl, being on my block, looking at me funny. All these different things are, the hood has defined to them what is respect and what is not respect, and their emotions are interpreting it. And because there's no man to model manhood, see what happened with my boys, and I mean my biological sons and the boys I work with in Black Men Lead, what happens with them is you come in, and as early as 6 or 7, I start telling them, in about 3 to 4 years, you're going to change. You're going to start to get bigger and stronger than your female counterpart your same age. Right now, y'all equal. She might be able to beat you up. But in about 3 or 4 years, that's going to start to change. Your voice is going to start to change. It's going to get deeper. You're going to have a natural tendency to develop more muscle than she does. She's going to become stronger. You're also going to have, as this testosterone, this hormone starts to peak, a natural tendency to be a little more aggressive than she is. That aggression isn't meant for you to use against her. It isn't meant to be used against your brother. That is to make sure you have the willingness to act in defense of her and anyone else that's behind you that needs your protection. It's a mechanism that says when it's time to go get it, you go get it, but you got to know what you're defending. You're out here defending the block you don't own because you don't know who you are. You out here fighting over stuff that isn't yours instead of understanding that I'm going to defend. And right now, our women don't even trust us because we're not raising young men to be protectors. They're more emotional than the women. They don't respond to rejection well. And now, in all fairness, because I'm a big fan of Dr. Curry, we've got to look at why. We can't just throw them out there and say, hey, look, they are horrible.
Exactly.
No, let's ask why. Nobody wants to answer that question because then we have to give validity.
There's a law of cause and effect here.
Yeah, that's always the law of cause and effect.
Yeah, we know why they're that way, and we know who the reason is they're that way. So that's why they don't ask that question or ask it or answer it, you know?
Right. And
well, I always say that when an issue comes up and you look at mass media, for every community, they'll bring on an expert. They'll bring on Dr. Clark. They'll bring on Dr. Blanchard. They'll bring on, these authorities, in these disciplines to speak to the problem and to give an expert opinion. But many times in our community, they'll bring on somebody, and this is not my word. I have to give credit to somebody else for this word, but they'll bring on a member of the decadent fail of that Black Miss Leadership class. I'm a big fan of Antonio Moore, and he always speaks to the fact that these people are put in place just to divert your attention and to get you off target. They're there to mislead you, and they receive all of the benefits to make them perform that way. It's a Pavlov situation. If they wanted to perform that way, they give them a biscuit, and then they perform that way, even if it's against their own best interests and the best interests of us as a people. Like you said, Doc. Black men, I grew up in the inner city. I was more afraid, and I have to speak to this. This is something that happened in New York City with Bernard Goetz, and my father was very involved in the Bernard Goetz and the subway shooting situation. And at that time, and I have two brothers who got murdered. I have an oldest brother, Roy Jr., who was murdered in the early 70s by gunshot. I have a brother, Alexander, who was murdered in 82 by gunshot. And I myself was stabbed in my back at 15 and almost murdered myself. And my father took a very, very, very strong stance on violence, because he says that most violence, even though the bidirectional violence that happens between the white community and black community, that happens, and it happens, profoundly, and and black men and women get killed. But we also have a level of violence, from within our group, and they're young men, and women. I don't want to leave that out. That are very violent, and they will consume from within. And the Bernard Goetz situation, he'd been the victim of several violent crimes and took it upon himself to say, you know what, I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to get a gun, and if someone approaches me on a subway or in the city, I'm going to take action. He gets approached by some young men intent on robbing him, and I say this because one of the young men, Troy Canty, his barber, his brother was my barber, Eddie Canty. And Eddie spoke to me candidly about his brother's actions that day, about what his brother intended on doing, and the fact that, had he been on that train and not been related to his brother would have robbed him. James Ramsar, who was almost the most famous of that group, who subsequently, had raped several women from our community in the Washington and Webster Project housing. So there's a lot of violence from sick individuals within our community that we have to get a hold of. If you can't control and police your own community, you can only rely on somebody else to come and do it, because they're not going to do it with the same sensitive hand. So if somebody comes and they have a mental illness, or they have a social disorder, or whatever they want to be categorized in the DSM under, I still do not want them to hurt me. I don't want them to hurt your mother, my sister, or me. And I've been a victim of violent crime. And in our community, we have to be very honest that the causality of it, we know, but it's happening and it's hurting us. Their children being shot, sleeping in their beds, playing in front of the house. Growing up black is running a gauntlet. And if you actually do make it out and hit the lottery, you are an exception rather than the rule.
And the thing is, I think that you while you have this reality of what's going on in the black community, you also have the media misinterpreting it and misplaying it and writing the narrative. And so in the sense of one of the most powerful books I read is a book called Breaking Rank by Norm Stamper. Norm Stamper is actually a former police chief in San Diego and Seattle, a white man who literally broke rank in being both of you guys being former police officers, you know what breaking rank means. It's not a popular term among police officers.
We both have done it. We both have done it.
Both of you guys have broke rank. Norm Stamper broke rank, and he told all. And one of the things he said in the book that totally blew my mind was, when you hear, he says, while white cops will never admit it, they have a natural inherent fear of black men. And he said,
because they had the fear before they became policemen.
Right. And this fear is always there. It's not because they're police officers, it's because of their perception of black men and a bunch of other narratives. But then he said, the bigger and the darker, the greater the fear.
That's true.
But see, his book was so candid about the corruption in the police department, and in that he wrote it in such a way that people could be identified, and people were literally indicted and tried for stuff based off it. So he lives in hiding in Central America.
As well they should have been.
Right.
As well.
The point I'm making is that because the narrative is going to take it and say, okay, black boys are killing up everything in the hood, then black men must naturally be inherently violent. And so you can't trust them. If you encounter them in any questionable situation, he may be having a mental crisis, but he's a black man. You got to put him down, or he could kill everybody. Now, and so there's this thing. So it's our responsibility to police it. It's our responsibility to address it. And the first thing we have to do is say, okay, why is he violent? He's violent because there are too many black men absent. We got 1.5 black men absent. Almost 1 million of them are in prison.
Exactly.
Okay. And then you got others that are dealing with issues where they are checked out on drugs or whatever. But you have a large gap of where there are not enough men in households. There are not enough men modeling it. And then what happens is, because the neighborhood has become so horrible, when you get someone of great repute, when you get someone of good character and stature, and they find the way to check out, as you put it, Kwame, they hit the lottery. They ain't trying to come back and fix what was broken. They gone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whoo, I made it out.
Yep.
I'm one of the few.
And everything attached to that makes blackness a cancer. If I hit the lottery and I move to a neighborhood with quote unquote good schools, we all know what that means. Right. And I move my kids and I give my kids the life that I didn't have. You know, now my kids have to be socialized and they have to code switch and they have to act in that other environment. And that environment teaches them what? White supremacy. It teaches them that everything from this community, everything that looks like this or as close to it as you can is good, and everything that looks like this is bad. If we all move into a neighborhood, the banks say that the property value goes down. Now here it is, we're all successful professionals, but our very presence is the cancer that brings the property value down. And as far as that's concerned, that white folks say, well, I don't want my property value to go down, you know, so I don't want them here, you know, and that dynamic is cancerous.
Exactly. That right there, what you're talking about, the very nature of being black in America comes with disadvantages.
It comes with a tax. Right. It comes with a tax.
It's a black tax, and people don't, you know, just me doing the studies to be aware of what we're facing and what, you know, the pathway to wealth is different for blacks than it is for whites. For instance, home ownership. Everybody's told home ownership is one of the first moves in the pathway to wealth. The problem is that we know now for sure that it's not an arbitrary reality that appraisers are giving lower values to comparable homes that are owned by blacks when it's time for appraising for resale value. The same home or comparable home that is priced, I mean, as much as $500,000 less than it is for a white person.
Exactly.
That's one element, but check this out. Okay, so and we know this because we've had black families sit up and have white friends remove all the proof of their ownership where there's no proof that a black family is there. Have a white couple, a friend come in and sit in for the appraisal and get the same property appraised 500 more. That's
and
not
instantly value attaches. Value attaches instantly.
Right, but check this out. Here's the flip side. When it comes down for the municipal entities around for property tax, the flip side happens. Black families get a higher property tax than white families.
They carry a higher burden, absolutely.
Okay,
and
so
that's
you get
done
a
by
resale
government
value, but a higher property tax. So
and that is the private-public partnership and collusion against black people between the government and the banks, insurance agencies, and all the such.
Absolutely.
But they'll tell you we're in a post-racist America. They'll try to sell it. But what we're talking about with code switching, it's really important to understand that dynamic because you reach a certain level of success and the natural idea is to move. When I decided to move to a nicer area, I wasn't thinking white. I was thinking safe.
Safe access.
Access for my kids to bring to school. So private schools are high, good schools and everything like that. The problem is that's white.
Exactly.
So now you move in and you either fit in or you stick out like a sore thumb and your kids are alienated at school or they have to learn how to code switch. The problem is when you code switch, it's a bruise to your identity, your self-image, your self-concept, your self-esteem, and you now have to make a choice. Which way am I going to play this? Well, there's a lot of benefit to being cool with these white people. Ain't no benefit to being cool with the black people. And it's no benefit whatsoever. Okay, so what am I going to do? Very few people have the strength and integrity to sit up and say, I'm going to own my blackness no matter where I'm at.
Exactly.
And it comes at a
price. Because it's a lonely walk. It's a lonely walk. And after you sacrifice and done what you're supposed to do to get to that point, The idea of taking it and almost throwing it out of the window because you have the character to say, you know what? When I take off this uniform, I'm a black man. When I walk my kid to school, I'm a black man. When I drive home from the station and I get in my personal car, I'm a black man. And all of the experiences that come with that, you know, either they ground you, or as James Baldwin says, you lose your mind. If you're a black man and you're not angry, then you got to be out of your mind, because everything that's going on here has to make you crazy, has to make you angry.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and he was so right. I mean, you know, I think everybody knows pretty much the basis of that quote. He says to be black in America and be somewhat conscious is to be in a constant state of rage. Just to be aware. So you got to be literally totally buried in ignorance to have peace as a black person in this country. See, my thing is,
but Doc Mike, you know, it's almost comical, because when he says it, it's true. That you almost have to walk around just bumping into the wall, you know, dribbling on yourself and crawling around on the floor, not to realize what's happening and what has happened to you systemically over generations, and then to act like it's all right.
Right.
And then teach your children, that it's all right.
Yeah, it's a form of escapism, because as you both said,
I make you guys. So when the Colin Kaepernick thing happened, and Colin wouldn't stand for the anthem, and that hit us all very close. It hit us because he's our fraternity brother. It hit us because he was a black man standing up against police brutality. And I'm ashamed when I see police brutality. You know, I travel the world, and I know that law enforcement is an integral part of a society staying safe. If I'm in Jamaica, there are black cops there. You know, they're law enforcement. If I'm in Trinidad, if I'm in Barbados, if I'm in Nigeria, Mali, Ghana, Ivory Coast, there's law enforcement there, because, you know, there's a segment of population, even though it's a small segment of population, that will commit crime. So you need law enforcement, you know. But when the job that you or I do with a level of integrity and character, and then you see somebody else go out and do it without that integrity, it's shameful. Yeah. It's very shameful.
And Kwame, I lived in Jamaica for 3 years, man. And you know what? One dynamic that was, I don't think it was shocking, but even the black cops in Jamaica are trained and socialized to shoot poor blacks. So it runs across.
And you gotta ask yourself, why is the result of all black behaviors, no matter how small or what's seen as egregious, whether it's refuse to comply, refuse to take your hand out of your pocket, refuse to be sane, refuse to be stopped and humiliated and degraded, you know, result in death for black boys, black men, black women, and black girls. Why? It doesn't make any sense.
And for officers like you and I, who I would say were involved in black empowerment and movement work, you know, it's a difficult load to bear, you know. For me, I could only do it for 10 years. After 10 years, and I was president of the National Black Police Association chapter in Indianapolis and a member of Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department. And it was tough, man, because you're fighting your own as well. You know, we had officers who didn't think there was a need for a black police association. You and I both know.
Well, they say that until it turns on them, and then when they get in trouble and they realize that many times the local PBA or FOP is not going to give them the same vigorous defense, then they want to fall back on Noble or the Guardians or something like that and say, "Oh, please help me." And then and I have to say, you know, I'm a big fan of the Guardians, Noble, and many of the police organizations, but sometimes they can even be afraid to step out front. Absolutely. because of the benefits that they receive in terms of details and pay and being able to go along, you know, so that they don't want to come out on certain issues. They almost pick and choose which issues that they're going to support and which they're not.
Absolutely. And it happens. That's why I made the comment earlier today about our Black institutions and how standoffish they have become about social issues. Even Colin Kaepernick, when that thing first happened, Kappa side didn't stand out right away.
No, it took a grassroots. It took a grassroots
time for them
effort to boil. Yeah.
And Dr. Wallace and I worked on a case involving an Alpha Chapter brother of mine that was killed in Dallas by a white gentleman and shot and killed in front of his grandson. And he didn't even have a weapon. And I never, ever got our fraternity to step out and support this brother in any way, shape, or form. So, like I said, our Black institutions are not stepping up and representing. They're more interested in social, chicken dinners,
advertising dollars.
They're more involved in that, and so it's tough, man. One of our colleagues always says, you fight institutional racism with institutions. It's very hard to do it individually. Sister Nyota says that, Doc. You fight institutional racism and discrimination with institutions. Where are our institutions to do that? Somebody tell me.
They're not there. And the thing is, what you have to understand is the way that the institutions of this country is developed and built and powered is with money. And so everything is built on an idea that you are winning and you're successful when you have it. And that makes when we as Black people buy into that notion that I win when I have money. I tell people all the time, you want to talk about the crap that is being spewed by our young Black rappers, being a baby of hip hop. Growing up being born in the 60s. I was born a year after you were, Kwame. I'm the baby on the panel today,
Kwame and I are 1966.
And I'm 67. But growing up in the 70s and the 80s, as 60s babies and growing up in the 70s and 80s, we saw the evolution of hip hop and how it was birthed out of the destruction of the Black Panther Party and the Black Nationalist Party. And it was a new way of communication. It was something that it's not now. But
no,
we talk about
that message from KRS-One, that message from the God Rakim, that message from Kool Moe Dee, the song, The Message, they were speaking to what was happening inside a Black community. That NWA, when NWA said F the police, it was for a reason. It was because they had been receiving hard times and beatings and horrible treatment.
Hey, Kwame, I was riding around in a police car bumping that. Public Enemy and everything, man.
And PE, exactly.
Check this out. We talk about what we look at now and how it's come and how our younger generation has sold us out in the rap game, and now they're being paid by major labels to perpetuate.
They're being paid by white supremacy to yell nigger.
Right.
And they're allowed to do it. You cannot yell anything homophobic.
Yeah.
You cannot yell anything against Asian Americans or Jewish Americans. You cannot yell anything misogynistic against white women. Right. But you can yell Black female dog. You can yell the N-word. You can do that and receive riches.
Because there's a purpose behind it. But let me explain to you the dynamic. The dynamic is this. We could talk all day about them doing it. But let me tell you something. When the narrative is, when the national narrative is, when the American dream is rich, the American dream isn't to have a beautiful family and be safe and secure. The American dream is to have riches beyond measure and be able to do whatever I want to. That's the American dream. That's what they're selling. It's a pipe dream, but they're selling it by the masses and everybody wants it. So now you take a kid who grew up, who had to share a bed with 4 other brothers and his sister slept in the same room. And he's sitting up and they said, we're going to give you a $500,000 bonus. I hear all that stuff you was kicking on the corner. I mean, it's fire, but that ain't what we want you to spit. This is what we want you to spit. This is what we're gonna pay you to spit, and we're gonna reserve the right to sit up and determine what goes on the album and what doesn't go on the album. We're gonna let you do some of your positive stuff, but we need some holes, some BITCHs, some Mollies and Percocets, some weed, some coke. We need some trap music, talking about how y'all selling that stuff to y'all brothers and sisters out there. We need that stuff because it sells. We got them wanting it, and you got to show them how doing that put you on top. If you go out there and do that, I'm gonna give you $500,000. I don't care what's going on in this kid's head. If he doesn't have a father in the home that's really truly grounded him, and all he's ever saw is poverty, and all he's ever wanted was to be rich and buy his mama a house, and you just walk up and put $500,000 in his hand, you think he ain't finna spit that crap?
Yep.
You gotta understand, until we can sit up and fill our kids, first and foremost, what they took from us most. Everybody talks about our names, our spirituality, and all of that, but what they took from us most as slaves, especially that first wave that came over, that new freedom, that knew what it was like to be powerful and unique and independent. They took our values, our interests, and our principles. Our VIPs, the things that determine who we are, how we see each other, how we operate with each other, what we think about it, the importance of connectivity and family, the importance of village and community, the importance of working and loving on one another, and nobody falls by the wayside. That's what a village is. You're not hungry in a village. Nobody was starving in the village because it was community. They took it. They made us individuals. They rewarded us for individually doing. They even rewarded us for individually selling out others. Mm-hmm. They gave us a mindset. You got to do what you got to do to win in this, and ain't nobody your friend. Mm. Now, at the same time, them same evil people have people they can't stand, but they work with them. Why? Common goals.
Common goals.
I personally know white men who hate each other, but they make millions daily.
But they make money together. They make money together.
They understand.
They can fight. They can fight a world war and then have a Berlin conference and split up Africa.
There you go. That's how they think. We're thinking on, I don't like him. I wish I would. I ain't going down there. I mean, your family's starving, but you won't go talk to him because you don't like him, and he can help you. Or you can help somebody, but you won't help him because he said something about something you didn't like 3 years ago, and you still holding on to it, and you can't get past the fact that you guys are stronger together, and that as long as they're controlling, they've taken something that was precious to you, hip-hop. They own it now. Mm. They're sitting in the background. For every million you make, they make 100 million.
Exactly.
And you think you're winning, but and what happens is your people are sinking lower and lower because you never saw the power you had in the gift you were given. That's why I'm real excited about what you're doing with Sane, Doc, because you're taking him away from what he had gravitated towards and showing him how to put that into a message that could change lives. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to get this younger generation to see the power they have and to understand it. I tell my kids all the time, ain't nothing wrong with a job, but let me explain something to you. If that man is going to pay you $100,000 to come work for him, how much do you think he's making off of you? So if he's making $1 million off of you, he's obviously got the plan, the strategy, the scalability to do that. You don't have that. So you might not be able to make the $1 million, but I guarantee you could double what he's paying you. Mm-hmm. You got to understand the power of what you have in you. You're not getting paid 6 figures because you're worthless. But now he controls it. Guess what happens? When he decides he no longer needs you or you become too old to work for him, that 6 figures goes with him. And it gets passed on to the person of his choice. But if you build something for yourself and you just make $20,000 more than what he's paying you, in some instances, you may make $10,000 less, but it's yours. Guess what happens when you go? You pass it on to the next kid. Your child.
A job is not a legacy. A job, an apartment are not legacies. You cannot leave them to your children.
You got to have a legacy to pass on, but that's got to be taught at an early age.
Mm-hmm. Got to have stewardship. There's a book called The Black Tax, written by a gentleman named Sean Rochester, who has a phenomenal story. He's a Bajan kid that he's an American kid that was raised in Barbados and then came back here to New York and then went off to University of Rochester and then went to Northwestern. I believe it was Northwestern. He went to graduate school. He's an engineer, and he wrote a phenomenal book called The Black Tax, and where he spelled that out and all the small microaggressions in the seemingly death by 1,000 cuts that happened to us as a people. The fact that we're missing over 1 million businesses, that we're missing homes, that we're missing wealth, that we're missing that the reason that why these jobs don't come to us is because the 2% rule, and he spells out the 2% rule, and then he at the end of the book he gives answers, you know, for what you have to do to try to come out of this, you know, the type of wealth building and the business acumen and mindset, and the fact that you have to be interested in legacy. It may not happen for you, as Dr. King says. I may not get there, you know what I mean, but you have to say to yourself, I want to leave this. If it costs you $40 a month, a cell phone bill, to leave $500,000 to your children, many of us can't make the decision to do that because we don't have $40 at the end of the month left over, you know, in household wealth, you know. So the idea of $40 I can leave my children $500,000 at $40 a month, you know. That's a lesson that I was taught at a very, very young age. You know, there are things that we can do to affect, through our stewardship, affect the next generation, and we need to be about the business of doing it. And that's whether we have $1 or $1 million.
Doc, how many times have you heard me say exactly what he said? And I say it exactly like this. In order for us to achieve as a race of people true liberation, true empowerment, we're going to need Black men who are willing to plant seeds that they may not live long enough to see come to fruition.
Oh, absolutely.
That's ultimately. We're going to have men who are willing to say, "This, I'm going to do this. I won't see it, but
I don't have to, and that's okay.
You got to be okay with that."
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people who are going to set it effect. When I sit up and I'm looking at these kids, I see any kid under the age of 10 right now as still being pure, even though they've more than likely experienced a lot if they're in the inner city. But they can still be cultivated because up to 7, they're still like sponges. So if you get them close enough and you start telling them who they are and you plant it deep enough to where when they start getting around them other people, it can be uprooted. And they understand, I got to build, I got to own, I got to, you know, and they understand it. I got to connect. Family is important. I can't go out and have 5 or 6 kids by 5 or 6 different women. There's no way to build wealth that way unless you're extremely rich and you're still splitting and you're still causing fractions in the psyche and the identity of the kids that you got in these different homes. So you got to understand how you teach it all, you get it all. What happens is that generation, if we can create that generation will withstand what has happened and won't fall victim to the narratives that are being pushed by mainstream, and they will be the change. You may not be here when it happens, but you will be the one that started it. If you don't start it, you're going to get a whole nother generation that just perpetuates the cycle. And at some point, somebody's got to stand up and say, I'm willing to do something for my kids I'm not going to benefit from personally.
Exactly. What do you want your legacy to be? You know, the idea legacy means that you're not going to be here, you know?
Right. But I think even a step further, Doc, we have to have a national drive to get this done, where we create the institutions in education and businesses and think tanks. We've got to be willing to finance that. And you talk all the time about you've been in this for 30 some years, and the limited amount of money that we have supplied you and other grassroots people. And I'm talking about grassroots people. I'm not talking about the nonprofit industrial complex
right.
itself, where most of the oxygen and money is sucked up into, and they never solve anything because it's not to their advantage to solve anything. They go out of business if they solve the problem. So that's where we got to get to, where we start supporting grassroots people like Dr. Wallace and yourself, Kwame, and other people that we've had on the show for the past 6 months.
Yeah, we have a fraternity brother in Bridgeport, Connecticut, who has a group called Boys Incorporated, in which he left corporate America, started his nonprofit in Bridgeport, and they have an after-school program and a mentoring program that brings young people in and teaches them coding skills and computer skills, and they nurture and work with them through elementary school, junior high school, and into university. I definitely would like. His name is Sean Bird, and it's Boys Incorporated out of Bridgeport, Connecticut.
And that's what I wrote a book on, a community research guide to student persistence, talking about wraparound services in education, because everything that we're talking about is basically wraparound services. What Doc does is wraparound services. You know, anything that you do to help a person develop educationally, mentally, spiritually, all of that, it's all wraparound services. And we got to start supporting people that are doing that on their own dime, because there are people out here that are addressing the situations in our community, whether it's New York, where you're from, or down here in South Florida, or Houston, where Doc is. There are people out there that are grassroots people that are getting this work done, but they're not being supported financially. They're doing it on their own dime.
And I'll close with that. Like for instance, with Black Men Lead is a rite of passage initiative, which came from the discussion that I brought forth earlier, which is about properly socializing young Black males. Simply in that one area, there are 5 influences in African American adolescent and young adult male violence. 5. Just by addressing one, you reduce that by 80%. By 80%. You look at what's going on, all of the shootings, man. I talked to, and I had to deal with families from several shootings about a month ago of teens under the age of 15. Under the age of 15. We're talking babies.
Yeah.
That and what's going on. And all of this is something that is highly preventable. You have to deal with that notion. But here's the thing, and Doc, you and I talk about this. In the 16, almost 17 years that I have officially been doing this, I've been doing this for 30 years. And I took my entertainment company and literally moved out of entertainment and moved into, I'm going all out for my people, because I didn't like what the entertainment world was going. I didn't like what was out there. I didn't like what was being represented. And it wasn't any space for me to do what I wanted to do, because nobody wanted to do it. Nobody wanted to talk about positive rap. Nobody wanted to talk about positive poetry. You can find it in little nooks and crannies, but nobody was talking about it because it didn't pay. Everybody wanted to talk about trap music back then. That's when Jeezy and all them was hot. So I said, okay, I'm pulling out, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do it on my own. At the time, I had plenty of loot, no problem. I got this. So, I said, okay, I'm going to open up. I'm going to start accepting donations. Nothing. No big deal. I got this. I'm going to keep going. I'm still generating revenue. I'm taking care of what I need to take care of. And then I look up, and here I am almost 20 years later, and I haven't raised $20,000. I haven't raised 15. But here's the problem. If there weren't people on my doorstep, in my inbox, on my phone, literally daily, then I would say maybe I'm pursuing something that I'm not needed in. And maybe that's why I don't have the support. But I got way more people than I can handle. Mental health. Oh, trauma. Oh my God. I mean, I got so many trauma issues of people coming who have been hurt as children, who are still trying to navigate it as adults. I've got women in their 60s that are still trying to overcome being in relations, in sexual abuse situations as children, that are coming now still saying, I realize this, I've got to do something. I don't want the rest of what I have left of my life to be the torment that I've been living in. Then I've got young boys that are angry because they don't know where dad is, or they don't even know who dad is. And they're coming to me. And all this is there. So I know it's a need, because everybody realizes the need. And they obviously realize I have the capacity, because they're coming to me. But at what point are our people going to say it's our responsibility to be a part of the solution too? That's where the village thing isn't happening. Everybody will sit up and say, man, that's awesome. Click the like button, tell you how awesome you are, how great you are. None of that takes care of the people who need it. None of it. I appreciate anybody that says some kind about me. I'm not an unappreciative guy, but I don't live off the praises of people. I never have. That's not what drives me. What drives me is, what am I going to be able to hang on the wall when I walk out the door of life and said, I did this. That is all that matters to me, is what I hang on that wall on the way out the door. What did you do with what you had? And so that's what I'm about. I'm trying to do that. And it's frustrating. It's draining as hell, you know, to see it and to know people are out there that could do something about it, and they don't. So I keep doing, Doc. We've been doing this a while. We've been doing this a while.
Yeah, and you hit on a few things with the trauma and the violence. Both you and I, Kwame, being officers, I know that you're well aware of what's been going on in K through 12 schools with the increase in violence and school shootings and what have you. And you know, it seems that Doc and I wrote a book about it, how, you know, we're spending $6 billion. Not book, but an article about how we're spending $6 billion on school security. And it's not going to make us safer. What will make us safer are the kind of resources and services that Doc and other grassroots scholars offer, which is basically wraparound services, including mental health.
Right.
That's what our young people are suffering from. Hiring more police and putting more police in schools will not make schools safer. And we see now that what is going on in our neighborhood, you know, if throwing police and money at the problem would solve it, it would have solved it in these young people's communities, because now they're bringing what's in the community into the school. The school used to be sacred. There used to be sacred. You wouldn't go in and do something foul in a school or a church, but that's no longer the case now. But the answer isn't more militarization. The answer isn't more police. The answer isn't more cameras and security equipment and all of this kind of stuff that we keep sinking billions and billions of dollars in. Doc's services are a lot cheaper than $6 billion.
Right.
If we had a national program to address what's going on in our schools and what's going on in our neighborhoods, that's what we actually need, and it's a hell of a lot cheaper than the money we're spending on jails and everything else. So,
but Mike,
yeah,
it doesn't generate the revenue.
Right.
The jails generate that prison industrial complex generates revenue. The private prison system. Heck, a couple of months ago, out in Seattle, there was a lawsuit in which the state of Washington lost. And they now have to pay inmates in the private prisons for work, you know, and they had to sue for that because they were paying them pennies.
Right.
You know, that's a big money maker.
Even here in the state of Texas. Okay, what happened was in the state of Texas, does not pay its inmates, and you definitely have to work. If you're healthy, you have to work. Or you're in SEG. Okay. Now here's what happened. The law passed that you have to compensate an inmate something for the work that you're getting from, because it's now a profit.
Yeah. See, Washington decided prevailing wage, that they had to get minimum wage, and they're going to backtrack.
Okay. Here's what happened in Texas. Texas says what we'll do is we won't pay you a wage. What we'll do is what we'll call good time. So say, for instance, you have a 20-year sentence, and you serve your time staying out of trouble, doing what you're supposed to, going to work every day, whatever. So for every day you serve, you get a day of good time. Now, when your good time and your actual time equal your sentence, you're supposed to be released. Now, hold on. Now, if that was the end of it, I would actually buy into that, because I could actually work my way out of my sentence earlier and be done. Here's what happens, though. At the moment that you're about to release, they make you sign over your good time again. You're still being released, but in order, as a condition of release, you have to sign over your good time. So now you're back to only having served out of that 2010, and now you're on parole for the other 10. And if you get caught in doing anything or violating any conditions of your parole, you can be returned back for the other 10 that you supposedly worked off.
Yeah, it's coercion and extortion. They're holding the body. You know, they're holding the body.
Right.
And if they hold the body, families will pay ransoms. They can, like you said, unless you're willing to be on 23-1, for an extended period for years, as we've seen some brothers, come out of prison for years, 23-1, 2-3 showers a week, unless you're willing to endure, that mental torture, then you will work for free as a slave. What does the Constitution say? Slavery is outlawed unless duly convicted of a crime. And when you have the person benefiting determining whether or not this or that is a crime, then of course you're always going to be convicted of crime.
I mean, look at what happened immediately after that. When you talk about the 13th and 14th Amendment, and you start talking about that, look what happened immediately. We go right into the situation where you have the black codes where blacks are not allowed to work in certain places, own land, or take certain jobs. Why? Because they were the skilled laborers. They had been they were the
only skilled laborers in the country.
Right.
That 4 million people that walked off those plantations were the only skilled laborers in the country. And as soon as they got off, and they decided, you know what? All of a sudden, if you look at 1867 to the start of the Industrial Revolution, that is about replacing us as a labor force.
Yeah. Right.
And it's happening again.
Right. And the way that they did that primarily was the black codes. We're not going to allow you to hold jobs. We're going to hold those jobs for non-blacks. But what happens is now, because you won't allow me to take a job, I am now considered what? Homeless and a vagrant. So they came up with the vagrancy laws. They made vagrancy a felony. So then we're going to arrest you.
Pig laws.
We're going to arrest you. We're going to arrest you. We're going to charge you with vagrancy. We're going to give you a sentence up to 12 years for vagrancy. And now you're going to go back to work on the plantation we freed you for free.
Yeah. And Doc, you remember one of my mentors, Dr. Kwame Richie Mann, in the book Unequal Justice, A Question of Color. She has in her book where after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865, just 5 years after that, we went from, slavery was obviously a prison, but they did actually create a prison system. And within 5 years, like you said, within 5 years, around 1870, we made up 35% of the prison population then. So you had an actual prison, and like you said, Doc, you had the codes, and the other form of prison, which was what do you call it, Doc? You know what I'm saying? That came after prison, where they had to
peonage, sharecropping.
Exactly. Sharecropping industry. You had that going on where you had to work, go back on the plantation and work your way out of it. Yep. Absolutely.
And it hasn't stopped. I mean, there are so many different things. Another paper that I wrote on was the impact of serial forced displacement. Everybody talks about gentrification, but gentrification is the younger brother of redlining, urban renewal, benign neglect, all of which has forced black people out. So say, for instance, you're centralized. At least you're in an environment where people like you have the same interests, the same desires, the same wishes, and you understand each other, you're working with each other. You also are in an environment where now you vote as a unit based off of your needs and what you're experiencing. Well, benign neglect, urban renewal, all of these things found a way to force people out of those environments. Now, here's the thing. Gentrification comes into your community and it displaces you, because what happens is you're living in the home that your grandparents owned. It's owned outright, but it has a property tax. Well, the property tax is pretty low because the property has only been worth about $60,000 for the last 40 years. But now they come in and they start to drive the property values up around. So the property now is becoming more and more valuable, but you don't want to sell because you don't want to leave. So what happens? Eventually, they either take it from you by foreclosure, through what you owe in property taxes, or you eventually have to sell and move. Here's the problem. Say you got 100,000 people in this community. Are they all relocating to the same community? No, they're dispersed. It's serial forced displacement and it's disbursement of power. We are losing the centralization of our proximity and presence, which is also power. And
there's no place where that's happening more than in the South. It starts in the Virginias, it goes through North Carolina and all through South Carolina. There's a place where my mother's from called St. Simon Island, Georgia. It's an island community. It's right next to Jekyll Island. They, believe it or not, they have world conferences. They hold world conferences. They hold G8 and G12 conferences on these islands, which are basically resort islands, where powerful heads of state and business people come in, and they play golf, and they have these meetings where they move money back and forth, and they call shots. And the people that have been there since Sherman's field order, all of a sudden now are being displaced. Like you said, Doc, the property taxes that might have been $600 or $700, all of a sudden skyrocket to $5,000. And in many of these places, once they label them, these prime real estate areas, now it could jump to $10,000. And if I'm on Social Security and I've been living in an intergenerational shotgun home, in rural Georgia or South Carolina or Mississippi or Louisiana, someplace that nobody wanted because it was near the swamps, and now it's water, now it's Waterview, and now they want us out, and now they will either, like you said, tax us out, or they will pay a member of our community, who's supposed to be well-meaning, a nominal fee to steal it from us, and many times that's our relative.
Yeah, that was also going on in my hometown of South Bend, Indiana. University of Notre Dame has always been located on the east side, and that east side was, historically black. And I told Doc about this years ago. I used to be an investigator for the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office, and went around and investigate the abuse and neglect and financial exploitation of elders. And many of these elders that I went around and talked to had someone come to them from the university basically saying, hey, we'll give you 10 grand or 20 grand or what have you. And to an elder that's in their 80s or late 80s or 90s, that might seem like a lot of money, and a lot of them would take it. And so they would sign off on a document saying that once they paid them this money, 20, and if they push back, they might go up to 30, but the home and the land, it altogether was worth way more than that, But they would take that money and dislodge them. And then, I look up, and those same homes that were taken from those elders were bulldozed, and they build these $500 to $1 million houses on them. So that's been going on in my hometown of South Bend, Indiana, for the last probably 10 or 15 years. So it's happening. It's happening everywhere.
Wow. Do we have time for one more question? Somebody?
Yeah. Take a couple of questions for Kwame, and then we'll try to shut it down.
All right. Joel Armstrong. First, he said, "Peace to the Friedman family, Dr. Wallace, and guests from B More." Then he says, "This is an interesting conversation. What do you all think of the Move to the South movement for foundational Black Americans?" I'm not highly educated on that. Either you guys?
I'm not either. I mean, I think wherever we live, we're going to have to build and work together. There was a great migration that came up north, and now we're heading back south. I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but as you, Doc, I'm not necessarily educated about what that really means. I've heard that they're trying to start some actual Black communities in Georgia. If that's what they're referring to, then yeah, I could support that. If they're going to do what Kwame said earlier, combine their monies and start actual Black communities, who could oppose that?
Right.
Yeah, I agree. In reality, there may be only one or two communities in the entire country of 40 plus million African Americans where we own and control even a 1 mile radius, where we own and control homes and businesses. And without that.
Okay, he added some clarity to it. And so I can kind of see it now. The idea is that if we get the vast majority of Blacks to migrate south, we do sort of what I was just talking about, how we've been displaced and dispersed to break down the proximal power or the actual power of our presence. He's saying that the idea is that we move back and we congregate in the South to obtain more voting power.
What do you think, Kwame? That's your area, man.
I believe that's a viable strategy. I mean, definitely believe it. I mean, we saw it take place in Georgia, in Atlanta, where Atlanta is that black hub, where many young black people move to get a start. And I use Atlanta because that's where we decided to kick off our brand, the cognac, where we had black business in mass, where we could talk to decision makers, where we could, you know, form relationships with restaurants and lounges and cigar bars and different venues, and they were people from our similar background who understood our story. So yeah, I do believe that. I believe that's what got the two senators elected in the last election, was the fact that people are moving to two places like Atlanta, to places like Tampa, to places like Jacksonville. They're moving to different places, and they're being successful.
Even though they were the wrong senators. I mean, the wrong.
Hey, that's agreed. But what I'm talking about is the ability to galvanize.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, oh yeah, the ability to galvanize around those two. We can do it with anybody. You know, like you said, we happen to do it for the wrong people, but we can do it for anybody.
Right.
We got any other questions, Doc? Anybody else?
Yeah, it was one person said one more question, and they haven't posted it yet, so I'm gonna give them about another 30 seconds.
Okay.
But I will say that I have definitely enjoyed this, Doc. You know, it was here's the question. So let's say we can get 4 states or so. Would it make a difference on a national level when it came to Congress and laws? I'm gonna give my insight on that, and definitely, Kwame, you weigh in on it. What you got to understand is each state, based on its population, will have a number of representatives in the House of Representatives. No matter the size of the state, you're going to have 2 senators. So you're not going to have a whole lot of leeway in the way of senators, because you're only getting 2 from the state anyway. But in the sense of how many representatives you have in the House, that's population generated. So if you basically propagate and populate like a couple, matter of fact, the fewer states you propagate to, the more power you're going to have in that state, but also in that representation, and you build your power outward. So what I mean by that, instead of sitting up saying we want power in 50 states, we don't have enough people to generate that quickly. But if everybody moved to Florida, we become the most powerful force in Florida. We take Florida.
That makes sense.
Literally. Now Florida is operating on this spirit. We sent half to Georgia. Now we controlling 2. But there has to be this mindset of how that's going to play out over time. But strategically speaking, this is how many empires, that's how Rome built its empire, by simply moving one region at a time and taking that region, converting that region into a Roman mindset and using the people in that region to conquer the next one. And so it's definitely viable. It definitely provides. Now, there's always the other side of it. When we're talking strategy, you have to look at both sides. The other side of it is you put all your eggs in one basket when you do that. And you're dealing with some very, very dark-minded people. We might look at the map and Florida might not be on that map no more.
Right.
I mean, you know, I'm just saying.
That's true.
Doc, let me piggyback on that. I think what you said is key. And I think I heard him say a little something extra in terms of congregating. I think he's talking about the Electoral College and how if we congregated in key states like Texas that has all those electoral votes, New York has a bunch of votes, California has a bunch of votes. If we congregate in certain cities like Michigan was very pivotal in this last election. I think that's what he may be adhering to, that, you know what, maybe if we congregate some of these states where that electoral college wasn't put there for us. That was put there so that Joe Manchin, West Virginia and Delaware could, you know, and other small states you know, even Wyoming and all of these places could also feel as if they were part of that game, and to work against the, you know, that growing number of African Americans and other people coming in from all over the world.
Right. And there you have it. I mean, that's a strong way to continue. Something positive, something to look for. It shows the minds that we have, because Noel just showed up, and I mean, immediately, here we go. And that's the idea, is that you have to think your way out of it. And I think it was Albert Einstein that said that you will never get out of a problem using the same thinking that put you there. And so
not at all.
We're obviously going to have to use a different approach. And so I think
let me say one last thing about that. You mentioned it early in the talk. Our local elections, you have more direct impact, and you're going to receive more dealing with your school board, dealing with your local county legislature, dealing with your local district attorney, dealing with your local, like in Brunswick, with the Ahmaud Arbery case. You know, Brunswick has a very large African American community, you know, but had not dictated who the district attorney was going to be, you know, who different executives are going to be that impact them directly. And that impacts your funding and your budgets and your schools. So that school board and those local elections, you know, people need to definitely stay involved in that. There's a lot of money, and there's a lot of power being wielded there.
Well, Doc, that being said, I want to thank Brother Kwame for coming on, man. It's been educational, man. I've enjoyed the conversation. I know that the Teachas listeners have enjoyed you, because I know I have. I know Doc has. Absolutely. Wish everyone, the listeners, as well as you, brothers, a safe and long, happy Martin Luther King weekend. And save me some of those fish. I didn't tell you, Doc, but this is a fisherman right here. This guy knows I love snapper and fish, so he's always posting these pictures of the catch of the day. And I can tell you the catch of the day involves probably 50 or more fish this brother's holding up.
Well, we definitely got to connect. I grew up on the water.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm going to come down and listen.
I'm coming to Orlando because he spends half the year in New York and the other half down here in Florida. So I told him, you know, I'm not getting on no boat. I told him that, but I'll come up to Orlando when he gets his catch. I'll come up to Orlando and make him some Jamaican steam fish, you know.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Listen, Houston has some great redfish. And I look forward to coming down there and getting it done.
Oh yeah, so next time you're down, you got to get at me. We can go out there, man. I love throwing them rigs out there.
Hey, we get out in Galveston and hook them up.
Yeah.
You know? And listen, on behalf of the Innis family, on behalf of everybody that has put sweat and effort into me to help me through my journey, I want to say thank you for having me. I appreciate you, brothers. I love this conversation. I love our people. Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings, bro.